All right, let's rock and roll.
Got it.
Good good evening. The
Good
summer
evening.
is over. The pools are closed. The US Open is still going on. For some reason they're playing a world championship of basketball in the Philippines. Our baseball teams are still kind of terrible. But football is back. And no Deion Sanders tonight, Anthony. Sorry. I'm Stephen Rabinowitz.
Oh,
I'm Jay Kaplan.
I'm Anthony Strait, and just so you know, my band and cast auditions blocked big time, so you're stuck with
Oh,
me for a little while longer, guys.
And that is Joe Tufaro, even though he's not. Welcome to the On the Sports Lines beautiful NFL 2023 preview. The locals, the playoff teams, the future disappointments, bad Super Bowl picks, and Trey Lance. One of those things may not inspire as much as the other stuff. In fact, they may not all inspire. But this is all ahead on our NFL preview show. But first, it's our gambling segment sponsored by DraftKings. All right. So, two Indianapolis Colts in June.
wait. Not FanDuel or Caesars, solely by DraftKings?
Solely by DraftKings because it's the only
NFL's
app
not going to like that, Rabbi.
I don't care. It's the only app I have. Two Indianapolis Colts in June for at least 2023. A Tennessee Titans offensive tackle for 6 games. Multiple Detroit Lions for either 6 games for the season. Shaka Tony of Washington for at least 2023. And add to it Calvin Ridley's 2022 full season suspension. And you wonder if gambling is more of a priority to the NFL than, well, almost everything else. Okay, so Joe, we're going to start with you. The NFL gambling policy. Is it fair? Is it not fair? What is the deal with all of this? It's becoming an issue in the entire league. How does this get fixed? How does this even get explained?
Well, it gets players actually paying attention to letters that they're written, to videos that they're shown. Managers from anyway, there has to be a way for these young men to pay attention, and unfortunately, that never happens. We know that none of them read the CBA before they sign it. None of them, they don't know anything about fines. They don't know anything about the rules. They don't know anything about anything when it comes up to them. So there has to be a new way of communicating to these young men. Maybe on their iPads, it just pops up all the time. Instead of a permanent banner,
like an alert, an alert that says you possibly might be having gambling issues. Please see the league office immediately.
To their iPad. The message should be pinned to all their social media that says, this is what you can do, it's what you can't do. And again, it's pretty straightforward. My friend who's on the chain crew of the Rams gets the same letter. They're not allowed to bet on fantasy football. They're not allowed to bet on football. They're not allowed to do anything at the facility. You can bet on other sports if you're at home, but not on anything that the NFL gives you, like an iPad or anything of that nature. And again, the guy, my friend who does the chain gang, he has to go to a meeting, and in anything that you can win more than $250 at. So if you're a fantasy football league or you're a pick'em league or whatever it is over $250, he do it, and he's on the chain gang. And he gets it. He understood it. They set him down. They sent him a letter. They hand it to him when he gets there. Make sure you read it, sign this, blah, blah, blah. Again, I'm sure they do the same thing with the players, but players just sign stuff and don't pay any attention, and their agents aren't doing a good job. I guess Steinberg actually has a group that he brings in, and he brings in a guy from the league to talk to him, and he brought in the guy from Westgate Sportsbook to talk to him and explain it to him. But it's, it's just like anywhere else in society. If you don't pay attention, you're going to get caught, and then you're going to try to blame it on, they didn't tell me. I don't understand. I don't know what to do. But it's pretty self-explanatory. But again, it would be nice to put it out there, very straightforward. These are the things you can do. These things you can't do, and have them understand it. But I don't think that's ever going to happen. So I know Jay disagrees.
Joe, I rarely disagree with you, but I'm going to slightly disagree with you here. I mean, because to me, it feels like every time the NFL rolls out a new policy on something, anything, it never seems to go well. Late in May, when Lions wide receiver Jameson Williams told reporters that until he was actually suspended by the NFL, he had no idea he was in violation of the gambling policy. At that point in time, the second, your player's confession was dubiously received. I believe the exact phrase was eye rolls. Williams and fellow Lions wide receiver Stanley Berryhill were the first two NFL players disciplined, as Rabbi alluded to, 6-game suspensions for violating the part of the policy that prevents players from betting on other sports while on team property. I mean, Rabbi, you went through the laundry list of players that were, that have been disciplined. I mean, by the time, the funny thing is it got to be a point, that ESPN was reporting around the same time as all of these things were happening with the Lions, that a second wave of, potential violations of its gambling policy was being investigated by the NFL. And in, by the time it was all said and done, in July, and that second wave supposedly had ended, 10 players had been suspended since April. I mean, look, the way I see it, the NFL should have realized sooner that this would be a little more complicated, especially with mobile and online sports gambling now legal in 21 states that are home to 15 NFL teams, and the league having 3 sports betting partners that I alluded to in the opener. I'd go so far as to say the NFL looks a little hypocritical in general on this issue when Robert Kraft and Jerry Jones, here he is again, are investors in DraftKings, and the owners voted in March to allow physical sports books to take bets at or near NFL stadiums. So, I mean, here are the 6 key gambling rules. These are just for the players. Don't bet on the NFL. Well, duh, obviously. Don't gamble at your team facility, okay, while traveling for a road game or staying at a team hotel. Okay. Don't have someone bet for you. Well, yeah, come on now. Don't share team inside information. Yeah. Don't enter a sports book during the NFL playing season. Okay. Don't play daily fantasy football. Okay. The thing that I don't understand is, why is it different from all other non-players who are employed by an NFL team, including coaches? They're prohibited from any and all sports betting. They can't even bet on non-NFL games, and they can't bet away from the team facilities. There's a new rule this year that requires rookies to attend a mandatory educational session regarding the league's betting policies. Joe, I'm sure you and I can figure out how well that attendance went over.
Not great. I can tell you right now, it's a big spoiler alert. Didn't go well.
Right. Here's the other thing that's interesting to me. You guys talked about the phone thing. The NFL is apparently alerted whenever a player uses a mobile gambling app on his phone. I wonder how widespread that one was made. They were made aware of. In addition to games, players can't bet on any NFL events, including the draft, the combine, the Pro Bowl, NFL flag events, and NFL honors. So, they can't even have their own version of a freaking Oscars pool. Nope. The NFL players are prohibited from entering a sportsbook during the league's season calendar, not just when their team season ends. The NFL playing season, as described to the players, begins with the Hall of Fame preseason game and ends with the Super Bowl. The fact that it took the NFL a full 3 weeks after this rash of suspensions to realize they didn't do a good enough job explaining things, and thus had to hold a video conference to better explain the do's and don'ts of the gambling policy after that uptick in violations, you got to wonder about that. Think about this, guys. The Athletic interviewed players around the NFL to ask what they know about the league's gambling policy, and found out that more than a few didn't know they couldn't place mobile bets on other sports while at work, the violation that Williams and Berryhill were suspended for. Here's the free agent with 7 years of NFL experience. Quote, I had no idea. I don't think any player knows about that. That's so specific. If players know about that, kudos to them. Here's a 9-year NFL vet. I thought you couldn't bet on anything during the NFL season. Technically incorrect. Here's a 10-year vet. I didn't really look into it beyond that. I don't even know what the rule is or when the rule changed or the fine print on what you can and can't gamble on. All of these players knew they couldn't bet on NFL action, but the rest of the details, the majority of the players weren't so sure about. 2 of them said that they've placed bets on other sports using mobile apps during the NFL careers. All the players agreed that the NFL and the NFLPA needed to do a better job at teaching the gambling policy to the players in particular. You think?
I mean, we could always just blame a players association. Let's just have every single segment we can just blame the unions for. That's
Look,
perfect.
Rabbi, I lay.
The players don't get paid this money to actually learn this stuff. They don't have to consult anything. They just, if they don't get told this, then you know what? Whatever.
You know what? And Joe's probably right. Maybe what they all should have done is instead of sending out an email or, holding a session with a PowerPoint presentation, they should have put it as a page in the playbook. Maybe then it would have gotten through. But I mean, it's as simple as it. Some of that stuff is pretty straightforward. Some of it's a little, and apparently, I'm sorry, but most of it is a little ridiculous when you consider that the NFL has completely totally gotten into bed with sports gambling.
Well, here's the thing though, and it's it's funny you brought up the Players Association. The league wanted to ban everything. Nothing. You can't bet on any sport. You can't do anything. Very simple. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
The association one who fought back, so that they had to come up with all of these different, different gyrations of what you can and cannot do. So again,
Rabbi,
player,
right? Blaming the Players Association isn't necessarily out of bounds here.
No, I know. I'm just saying that's how it would have been simpler to do it that way and then make changes to it, not try to give out the policy and then say, oh, we disagree with that. So here's the different things. See, I don't think it's hypocritical to have the Commanders have a sports book at the facility that the players can't use, but the fans can use. How is that hypocritical? You're telling the player, if you're signed by us and you're an employee of the team, you can't use it. Very simple. It happens in a lot of this happens in a lot of different businesses, Jay. You know that. You're not allowed to do certain things where you work.
On the premises. On the premises, I get, Joe, because it's a team facility. But, I mean, the plane maybe because it's a team-owned plane. The hotel is technically public property. Okay?
Okay.
Away from the
but who's paying for the room? But they're not paying for their own room. The team is paying for the room.
I get that. I just think that there's...
Guys,
they should have kept it simple and said you can't do anything.
Yeah, guys, before we get to another edition of the McLaughlin group, we need Anthony to finish this off here.
You know what? Rabbi, I texted you earlier, and I asked you a simple question. Is it possible to do research or something and be even more confused than when
it comes to rules?
Yes. I agree with you on that, Ann. I was getting ahead of doing my research.
Look, I would be perfectly honest. I was confused by this whole thing because I think the league did a poor job of explaining some of the rules. And I don't mean the straightforward ones, like don't gamble on your team or don't bet on football games, particularly the ones you're involved with, a la Pete Rose. But some of the other shades of gray areas, like, okay, you can't bet on non-sport and non-NFL events at team facilities. It's like, wait a minute. It's one day if you give me a burner phone, which some teams do give players that are property of the team. That is one thing. But to tell me what I can't do on my own personal phone in my own personal space,
but
I'm not actually violating
gambling. And they're worried about guys suddenly owing millions of dollars to some bookie, and they say, "Well, if you throw the game, we'll wash the thing." It's happened to Phil Mickelson. It's happened to the NBA. It's happened to a lot of guys.
Yeah,
that's all they're trying to do is to keep that from happening. And guys are going to do that because they're idiots. Every one of these players, 90% of them are complete morons. They want to be told what to do. So you need to make it straight. They should have made it none at all, and it would have been very simple for everybody.
Yeah, like I will say this: like I don't expect anyone. I don't expect a player from the Commanders to run to the sportsbook facility in the middle of at halftime at FedEx Field and place a bet. I think that's going overboard. But there are some things that's like little things like if I understand, don't place bets using NFL team issued equipment like a tablet, for example, like a burner phone, for example, that only team personnel can keep in contact with you over. But then what happens if we're staying in a team hotel? Say we're playing the Raiders on a road. We're in Vegas. and we're in a team hotel where I'm in the lobby area, which is a public area, by the way, public space, and I'm using my own personal phone, my personal iPhone, and I decide, you know what? The NBA has several games tonight. I want to place a bet on the Lakers versus Pacers for the over/under, and it's like maybe $20. Am I going to get a 6-game suspension for that? Rather, which is maybe a little slap on the wrist, rather compared to say, okay, I'm sharing team inside information that could literally jeopardize the competitive spirit of a game I'm participating in. Which would be a lot more criminal in as far as violating the rules. So there's a lot of areas of like stated graded areas that the league did a poor job of explaining to its players.
Yeah,
and I think that's something that, like literally, during mini camp, you have mini camps for a reason. Explain these things to the rookies, to the veterans. They may not know all the rules. Maybe I'm quite sure there are players who read the rule book, but there are those table of contents. Every once in a while, you skip, and then you get a final exam, and suddenly, holy crap, I didn't look this over. And you go from an A to you better hope you pass with a 65 and under. And
Okay.
I think the league of players.
If you don't like it, get another job.
Better.
If you don't
Exactly.
like it, get another job.
You just said it perfectly. You just said it
Get another
perfectly.
job if you don't like the rules.
If you don't like it, get another job because you are paid to learn these rules. All right. Let's go to the
we're split across the board on this. So
yeah, you guys are wrong, and Rabbi and I are right.
That is correct. That is correct. It's a 50% accuracy because I'm still confused. It's a 50% accuracy hit.
Right.
I'm the kid. I'm the kid in the back of the class raising his hand 20 times to figure out what the hell I'm uploading right now.
And then I ask you basically go to the syllabus. All right, let's go to the locals. This is the season of expectations for both tenants of MetLife Stadium. And we're going to start with the Giants because they are the landlords of this place while the team in green is still paying rent. After trust me, I'm going to come up with more reasons for this as the season goes on. After a 9-7-1 season a year ago, the Giants are trying to prove that they are not the one-year flash in the pan that gave Brian Daboll Coach of the Year in 2022. Remember, Ben McAdoo led this team to the playoffs in his first year.
Trying to forget that one.
Yeah, just letting you know. Not a lot of changes for this team in 2023. They locked up their QB Daniel Jones up long term, kept Saquon Barkley in-house very, very short term, and have a new target for Daniel Jones in Darren Waller, or as Anthony likes to call him, Mr. Kelsey Plum at tight end. Let's have a discussion. So we're going to ask Joe some questions. We'll talk. Jay, lead off.
All right. So, Joe, we know that just by being QB1 in New York, there are high expectations, warranted or not. But the moment a big contract gets involved, those expectations increase exponentially, again, warranted or not. And in the case of Daniel Jones, who's had these expectations from day one as the successor to Eli Manning, I mean, he was even dubbed Eli 2.0 almost from the minute he was drafted. You know, he now has the big 4-year, $160 million contract extension coming off a solid season where he improved in several areas, leading to an uptick in performance and production. There are games where it seemed like he was the entire offense, especially after Saquon Barkley got hurt, as Brian Daboll and Mike Kafka unlocked parts of his game that Joe Judge and Jason Garrett either didn't think he had or just plain wouldn't let him use, which helped him lead the Giants to those 9 wins in their first playoff victory since Super Bowl 46. Something that's carried over. Jones has looked a lot more comfortable in the offense from both an execution sense and an ownership sense. Proved his ability to throw off platform, and it's been really apparent throughout OTAs, training camp, and the preseason. Shown an improved ability to change arm angles to better deliver throws, quicker reaction times, more confidence in throwing passes when his feet aren't set perfectly. All tools that a quarterback needs if he's going to make the jump to the next level. All of that is me taking the scenic route to asking you what you see as the expectations for Daniel Jones in the wake of this new contract and seemingly taking his game to the next level in training camp in the preseason.
Yeah, we've had this discussion before. It's not, the contract is not really what it sounds like, but it's what his agent wants him to make it sound like, that he got a lot of money. So that's fine. But they got Paris Campbell also, and they brought back Slayton, and they got Darren Waller, and they have Saquon Barkley, and they have second year now as a tight end, and you've got hopefully 2 tackles that look pretty good. You got a brand new center who looks pretty good out of Michigan State, and so they've made a lot of improvements on the offense. I don't agree with they haven't made any changes. I think they've made a lot of improvements. I think
Agreed.
Barkley having a full off season where he's healthy the whole time, got to train, and came in and was at camp, even though they had the little.
By the way, it's still some changes, but I think it's still a lot of of the same parts, along with Waller and the Paris Campbells of the world. You still have a lot of the same parts. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but you have healthier parts as well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying, I said, it's stagnant. I'm just saying this is not a team that had a lot of turnover from a year ago.
No. And they added a lot of speed, and they added a lot of guys who can certainly stretch the field. And I think you saw it in the one preseason game. You send the 3 guys on the outside down on run patterns, and you bring Waller underneath. And Jay said it to me right away. I think you're going to see this 3-by-1 a lot. And you go, yep. Yeah, because it makes sense, right? And even if he starts out on the line, you get all those guys with all that speed running down. There's going to be lots of rooms for both Bellinger and Waller and Barkley. Barkley didn't even play in the preseason, and it's funny to go with some of these other teams, like the one with the helmet next to you, who decided, they played all their guys when we didn't play anybody. And it's funny because Barkley preseason, and a lot of guys, you don't realize that. They asked Daboll, they said, "Hey, does Barkley get any veteran days off in camp?" And he said, "Yeah, game day." He goes, "Yeah, we don't play him on game day," and that's going to be it. So, in that preseason game against the Jets, or the week before the Jets against Carolina, I guess it was, Jones went 9 for 9. Waller had the 9 for 10. Waller had the 1 drop, but it was a perfect pass. So he's perfect. They go down the field, 75 yards. He scores a touchdown. He runs. They run the ball well. He throws the ball well. And again, the best player on the field is not even there. He's not even playing in Barkley. So I think the offense they're going to look at the offense to be more dynamic. You got who beat Sauce Gardner twice on routes, just that, Tyrod Taylor couldn't get the ball to him, or Tommy DeVito couldn't get the ball to him the second time. But again, you see some of these flashes of these different players, and you're not going to be playing the number 1 defense in the league every week. You're going to be playing some guys that have no cover guys at all, that have bad safeties, that they're going to be able to get some guys open. And again, this offense is going to go as far as, what do we always say? As far as the offensive line takes it. Because if you have to start stacking the box because you have Saquon Barkley running the ball, you're in trouble, because you're not going to be able to single those guys on the outside. I don't care what their names are, if they're rookies. Paris Campbell can run like the winner than he is. Slayton can still run. And then you got Waller and Bellinger. And it's just going to be, as long as Daniel stays within himself, which I don't think is an issue, because he's not that kind of guy to suddenly think I have to do something more because I got a big contract. That's not him. And that's the part about being Eli that's good.
Yeah.
I don't care how much you're paying me. I don't care. As long as you sign me and I get to stay, my agents took care of my business. I'm going to be doing 1 billion commercials. I'm going to be on with Eli and Peyton after I retire. I'm going to do anything I want to do if I'm successful as a quarterback in New York. And that's the same thing Saquon came to, is I make it here. I'm big. We win. I can write my own ticket. I can be anything I want to be. I can be on every commercial. I can be Mr. Dunkin' Donuts. And that's what's going to happen. But I really do. I'm excited about this team as long as Evan Neal looks good and can hold his own, and they don't have to go max protects, and they don't have to keep Bellinger in, or they don't have to do certain things. This offensive line is halfway decent with the talent that they have, and as good as Saquon is, because he only needs, this much to break something off and to run somebody over. And when he puts his mind to it, which his mind is to it this year, he's going to run guys over and he's going to make guys miss. And he's worked on his pass catching, which was always the weakest point of coming out of college. He has a lot of drops the last few years. I think this offense can be really pretty dynamic if they, again, can keep the offense forward.
So what you're saying, Joe, is that, any narrative regarding expectations are created by the fan base and the media, and those of us who actually are in this profession,
I think
should ignore those things because it doesn't really matter.
Well, I think, Jay, it's funny because you hear guys like, we'll use the obvious one, Colin Cowherd, who can't figure out that you can't trade draft picks for a baseball player, who can't figure out that you have to have the same number.
So did A-Rod, by the way. A-Rod thought the same exact thing, and he's an actual baseball player.
Yeah, well,
let's hold off on that one.
It just means you don't need to listen to any of these guys. You should be listening to us. That you need to have the same numbers of wins and losses when you do a prediction. Those type of small details that he seems to miss. So,
right.
To stick to the narrative of Daniel Jones from the first 2 years when he had turnovers. I mean, you watch the games, Jay. As soon as Daniel Jones has a turnover, what do? They try to
lose their minds.
Oh, he's the third leading. He used to be the leading fumbler. Now he's the third leading fumbler because he doesn't do it anymore. So let's not go back over the last 2 years. Let's go all the way back to the beginning and say, oh, this is the problem with Daniel Jones. He turns the ball over too many times. So his 5 interceptions last year, 2 of them at the end of halves where threw the ball up for nothing, 1 at the end of a game.
What was he? Top 3 in terms of lowest interception percentage by NFL quarterbacks last year.
So, let's going back to when he had nothing, when he didn't have when his head coaches changed, when his coordinators changed. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt here and say, you talk about guys that can't win Super Bowls and you put that tag on them. First of all, you're going to be on there's only one guy that wins it every year, right? Mm-hmm. And you're allowed to win more than one, Eli. So what happens? That cuts other guys out. So Dak Prescott doesn't win a Super Bowl, right? Either has Joe Burrow yet, either has, all these guys. I just think that's an easy tag to put on somebody to go, oh, he's not going to win a Super Bowl. Well, there are plenty of guys. There are guys in the Hall of Fame who never won a Super Bowl. Dan Marino never won a friggin' Super Bowl.
There are guys who won Super Bowls who are never going to even remotely sniff the Hall of Fame playing quarterback.
Exactly.
While we continue on this love fest here, I think we need to move on this one. But
I always go back to when they asked LaDainian Tomlinson about being in the Hall of Fame, and he said, I'd rather be in the Hall of Fame than win a Super Bowl. Well, you can't answer that question because you never won a Super Bowl. So you can't compare the two if you've only done one of them. Right. So, again, it's an easy tag to throw on somebody, and that's what sports talk is these days, right? It's negative, negative, negative. Everybody's this. Nobody's any good, and that's just how it works.
So we had a segment about not putting a tag on Daniel Jones while asking about what should we do to put a tag on Daniel Jones. Okay, that's great. Anthony, let's talk about defense.
Well, one of the more interesting things that has been going on the defensive side of football, at least in training camp into the preseason, has been at the cornerback decision. We know Deontay Banks, the first-round pick, would be one of the starters. I had a great shot at being one of the starters. But a lot of people didn't see Trey Hawkins III, the 6th-round pick, out of Old Dominion, showing what he can do and being as impressive to the point where Adoree Jackson, the veteran, has been moved over to the nickel position. And these are the unofficial depth chart has these 2 rookies as the starters heading into week 1, which is pretty interesting. And my question to you is, in year 2 of Wink Martindale's defense, how much of an impact do you think these 2 rookies was going to have in the defensive backfield?
Well, I think it shows 2 things. It shows how good scouting can be and how good you can go out and watch somebody and try to get a feel for them and not worry about who they're playing against, but learn technique and those type of things. And then it shows how bad sometimes the draft process is. We all know guys get put in the boxes. Oh, he's an 8th round. Oh, he's the number 23 cornerback. And, they start ranking these guys from when they're in junior high school now. And it's great. So you go out there, they saw a kid, they put him out there. And Adoree said it this week. He said, the 3s early on, and he was a force and he was a leader and he was out there and he was making plays. And then saw him play with the 2s and again, he was out there every minute of every practice and making plays and listening and learning. And he goes, and then they threw him in with us and nothing changed. And so he's a very mature young man. He's obviously got some good techniques. He's learning from some good guys. The Giants have good coaching staff. And to the point where Adori's very comfortable moving in and saying, I think it for Adori to say, I think it makes us a better team with him starting out there and him going to the slot. Of course, we all know with Wink Martindale, nobody really has a position. So as he says, Wink said, they're perfect for this defense, just like Isaiah Simmons is perfect for this defense. We can put him in different places. We can play them. Banks is a good run support guy because he doesn't mind tackling. He's a bigger guy. So I think the fact that you were able to find this little gem, on defense that they probably didn't expect to just step in like this is a boon. And I think it's, they're going to make mistakes. They're young kids. Jay, what happens to young players? They get hurt.
They make mistakes and they get hurt.
Yeah. So, that's that. I don't expect the kid to go straight to the Hall of Fame, but I do think it's a positive. And if they trust him, if those two coaches and that general manager sat down and picked him to be the starter, I got to believe he knows what he's doing. Again, you saw a little bit of him in preseason. Don't take any stats, Jay, from preseason or from training camp stats where they go, he didn't give up any completed passes over 20 yards in training camp. I'm not sure how anybody keeps track of this.
Yeah, you and I both know how the beat writers for the team love to kind of put down the quarterback's completions in 11 and 11.
They have to write something.
Yeah, I know they have to write something, but the fact that so many fans try to extract, and even some talking heads try to extrapolate that into what it's going to, what's going to happen when the games count, it just makes me laugh. It really does.
They get paid for this stuff to basically bullshit, okay? No. It makes me laugh too, but that's what they're supposed to do.
Nobody knows from anything that's happened before tomorrow what's really going to happen. So all of this stuff is nonsense. Power rankings and all this garbage that's out there. All of a sudden the Jets are the 6th best team in the league because they got a 42-year-old quarterback that.
Oh God, I thought it was like 40, but that's we'll talk. Let's talk about that in a second. Yeah. All right, but let's talk about best case and worst case scenarios. I know this is not your favorite segment in the world to talk about, but I think the way that I think in the NFC, there's such a logjam of crappy teams in there that I think the Giants have a good chance to be pretty much exactly where they were last year, as at like a 5th or 6th seed with the chance of winning a game in the playoffs. And I think what I would like to see as a best case scenario is in their 4 games against Dallas and Philadelphia in the regular season, win 2 of the 4. Win 2 of the 4. I think having Philadelphia week 16 and week 18, which is, by the way, ridiculously dumb, kind of changes that opinion a little bit. But win 1 or 2 of those games legitimately and then see where everything else is. I do think, though, this is still a building process, so I cannot expect them to win this division this year unless Philadelphia takes a massive step back. And although I don't know if they're the Super Bowl team in the NFC, I can't see them taking a massive step back. But they can be better than Dallas. Yeah. Worst case scenario, I'll talk about the worst case scenario in a second, but that's where I think the ceiling is right now for the Giants. Obviously, the ceiling can be higher, but I think for this team, just consistency from a year ago and even improving on that record, even if it's just 10-7, is a huge win.
Yeah, I'll go with that. I think finishing second in the division would be great. I think that, if you do go back to last year, they kind of stole the Tennessee game on the 2-point conversion, but also the guy missing the 35-yard field goal at the end of the game. You stole a few games early on to get some of that belief in it. So, right. That foundation of we believe we can win because you went out and destroyed Minnesota. That's there at least. But then they were humbled against the Eagles, so they know they need more work. So that's why I think they're in a really good spot, knowing that there's more work to do. and these guys are the opposite of the other hype machine on the other side of town. They are low key. They always say, look, this is a process. We just want to play one game at a time, 1 week at a time. We'll decide who's playing every week. We'll change up. Our defenses change every week. Our offense changes every week. They're very, very flat line.
That's also, I feel like that's also the advantage of having a fan base that's seen 4 Super Bowls. And has won 5 NFC championships. I think that's the advantage because they don't have to be impatient. The worst case scenario for this team, though, is probably a decent step back, going under 500, possibly 7-10. And the worst case scenario would be if Sam Howell of Washington ends up actually being anywhere near good, meaning that NFC East is going to be exactly as hard as it was the year before. I don't know if that happens. Can I see that happening? Sure. We saw that Giants peak in the Ben McAdoo era of 2016, and then immediately the downhill spiral after that was the next 5 years. I don't think that's going to happen, but I do think that is a worst case scenario and a concern a little bit, especially if Daniel Jones does have a regression of a season.
Yeah. To the point of, but the organization is in better hands than it was back then.
I agree.
And that's the biggest difference is between Shane and Dable. You're not going to have any drop off in effort. You're not going to have drop off in different ideas. You're not going to sit Eli Manning because you want to put Geno Smith in. All of that stuff's not going to happen. So I think that I was talking to my nephew the other day. I said that this franchise is in better hands than it was under any of those guys. And whatever happened with the GM picks and all that kind of stuff, I think they're in a much better space. I don't see them taking a huge step back. Look, again, if they go, what were they last year?
9-7.
They were 9-7-1.
I can't add any more to 17. It's just not in my.
Yeah, I know. It makes my head hurt too.
But I think they could win. Again, I don't think they're winning 12 games, but I think they could win 10. I think they take that tie and convert it, and you go 10-7 in this league, you're fine. You're making the playoffs.
And with that schedule, it's a big accomplishment. That's what I would have to say.
Yeah.
All right.
And I don't think they get the home playoff game or anything, but I think they get to 10-7, and
they showed last year they could win in a playoff game on the road. So
I think worst case scenario is again someone gets hurt and they go 6 and whatever
11.
6-11. I can't do it. So 6.
Okay. Sorry, guys.
Hey, I grew up with 3-12-1.
There you go. Yep.
I would say this though before we move on. 4 of the first 6 games for the Giants on the road. So right out of the gate, it's going to be a huge test for this team if whether or not they're going to be a playoff team or at least a factor before we get to the month of November. So we shall see.
One of them is on the home and one of them is in Arizona. Big difference. Okay. New York Jets, holders of all that is frustrating for all of their faithful fans, are back after a 7-10, 7 + 10 = 17, record last season. Although he's not dead.
NFL math.
It's unfortunate math. Wait until it gets to 18. Although he's not dead and still on the team, you're technically subtracting Zach Wilson, the starter, and you had one hell of a 4-time MVP at quarterback in Aaron Rodgers. Add to it some of Aaron's old friends, as in wide receiver Alan Lazard and Randall Cobb, not David Bakhtiari, offensive lineman. That would be a legitimate friend that you would need. And we have a lot of expectations for the Jets. What? Does that make sense, Jay?
It still sounds weird.
We as a collective nation of New Yorkers, not all of us. We'll talk about that in a second. All right. Let's have a damn discussion without being biased. Start off, Jay.
I know. All right. So, Joe, I mean, obviously it's not a surprise, especially when your team's on HBO Hard Knocks and you're the star of the show, that for the Jets, it's been all about, as Rabbi said, Aaron Rodgers, even before he set foot inside Florham Park. And while there's some merit to the theory that even last season's off year by Rodgers would have been enough to make the Jets offense playoff worthy, considering the incumbent playmakers like offensive rookie of the year Garrett Wilson and running back Breece Hall before the knee injury, and that said offense should only get better with, new playmakers like Rodgers' old wide receiver pals that Rabbi just mentioned, not to mention the addition of Dalvin Cook. However, the one issue with this offense, it seems to keep getting lost in the bright lights of the Aaron Rodgers fest, and the Jets won't be able to hide this for much longer, is the offensive line, a unit that has the momentous task of keeping the Jets' Canton-bound quarterback upright so he can make the plays they envision him making that will lead to the franchise resurgence they think will happen. A unit that has not played a single snap together the entire preseason. Left tackle Dwayne Brown and right guard Elijah Vera Tucker are expected to be the anchors of the line, but the 38-year-old Brown practiced for the first time on the last day of training camp. Vera Tucker's coming off an injury-plagued season where he only suited up for 7 games. And then there's Mekhi Becton, who went from practicing exclusively at left tackle and taking himself out of the Hall of Fame game to getting locked in as the starter at right tackle before the preseason was even over. Some of that is because the other right tackle options were just plain awful. Some of it was Becton earning it. But can he stay healthy? He hasn't really played major snaps since his rookie year of 2020. 1 game in 2021, 0 games last season. Overall, he's missed 32 straight games with knee injuries. If he goes down again, Vera Tucker has to move to right tackle. That's going to weaken this unit even further. Joe, once again, I'm taking the Seating group, but what I'm going to get to is asking you, how concerned are you about the Jets' offensive line and its ability to protect Rodgers so he can do what he was brought here to do?
Giving you an unbiased answer, I will say that I'm terribly concerned. I think it's the worst thing to do to upgrade every other position and completely ignore the offensive line. You could have, instead of signing a couple of these other guys that anybody can do what they do, you should have gone out and found some offensive lineman somewhere. And of course, they drafted the wrong guy, as we all said it that night when they drafted Becton. So, he's so happy that they named him the starter. I'm like, you were supposed to be the starter 4 stinking years ago. So maybe earn some of your money at this point and figure it out. I don't see these guys staying healthy all year long, considering what you just said. They didn't practice together till training camp. So someone's going to go down. I think what Rodgers brings to them because of that, because they're so bad up front, he does have still has a quick release, and that offense is still based on the same. I watched the preseason game, the second drive, because the first drive, of course, he was chased all over the field and had to throw the ball away and had to punt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We that one just kind of disappeared for some reason from film. Everybody starts with the second drive, but second drive was very simple, right? Everybody goes this way, and there's a running back standing by himself over here that he gets to flip the ball to. Anytime there's a little bit of pressure, he has a very quick release, but there's always somebody wide open standing in the flat. It's the old West Coast offense. It's the same thing that they've been doing for years. So he does make it better, because we all know Zach Wilson would have said, "Oh, does that guy play on my team? I got to throw it to Wilson." So I think that that's where he makes them better. But again, unless you're planning on a bunch of 15-play drives where you're going to get a lot of little things going right, I think that they're in a little bit of trouble. You're not going to be able to do very. We all know Aaron Rodgers can't run anymore. He's pretty much refuses to run, and he doesn't move around that much anymore. So again, if you start to send, as the Giants did with their second string guys, you start to send 4 and 5 guys after him on a regular basis. Again, you're not going to trick him into too much because of who he is and what he knows. But just like we talked about Dak Prescott last year in the playoffs, is he's good against the blitz, but he's not good under pressure. So a couple of different things. So you need to figure out a way to bring pressure with 4, 5, 6 guys constantly against him. Now, again, they have good running backs. Maybe those guys can force you into playing a little bit of a different defense, and their defense is good. But goes, they need to figure out, and they need to get lucky with their offensive line. Otherwise, you're going to have Zach Wilson playing because A.A. Rodgers is on a stretcher somewhere on the sideline.
Yeah, something to keep in mind. And, I kind of tracked these numbers down today because it kind of jumped out of my head. I wanted to see where they ranked last year. Pass block win rate. Jets ranked 21st at 57%. Run block win rate, they ranked 30th at 69%. kind of not what you're looking for when you have an aging quarterback who, as you said, Joe, refuses to run, and you have a number one running back coming off a knee injury.
You also have a number 2 running back who has been a number 1 running back and a Pro Bowler for 5 years.
That's fine,
so
but again,
we can talk about that.
I am as concerned about the offensive line's ability to do what needs to be done as much as Joe does, because Joe and I are in agreement on this philosophy. You win in the trenches, and right now, I don't know that the Jets can control the line of scrimmage.
Anthony, you control the trenches right now and give us your question to Joe for defense.
Well, we know that a lot of the attention last year, at least with the Jets defense, definitely was in the secondary with Sauce Gardner, the rated defensive rookie of the year. But a big part of the turnaround from 31st in 2021 to top 3 last season was that defensive line. And according to Pro Football Focus, they were top 5 in coverage and rushing the passer, led by Quentin Williams, who got a lot of recognition in that regard. And my question to you is, with the defensive line being as good as they can be and being such a big part as to why the Jets defense is so good last year, how far can that unit take this take the Jets as far as being able to win in the trenches and continue what they were doing a year ago, and that was getting to the quarterback and pressuring the opposing QB particularly on 3rd and long situations?
Yeah, I mean, and no team wants to get in 3rd and long, obviously, but I think this team, I think I said that this defense will go as far as that defensive line takes them. All these rankings and stuff are great, but it only is against the teams you played against, right? It's not against, they didn't play certain teams and they didn't play a certain echelon because they had a weaker schedule last year. So I think that although they're ranked very good and, Sauce Gardner's already in the Hall of Fame, I'm not sure why.
Why are we even doing this anymore? I mean, he's
exactly.
good. We're all set.
Yeah, so I don't know why he keeps playing. He might as well just retire. But I think that they're going to be in that same boat, is if you do figure out a way to get a little max protect, if you do get a way to throw more on 1st and 2nd down against them, and they do have some weaknesses back there, is a little bit weak, but I think that defensive line can get also a little pass rush happy, right? So maybe you get a few more draws, you're going to get a lot of screens against them, where then anything can happen. I think it's a very good unit. I do think if they do win, if we do our best case, worst case, I think if they win more games than I'm expecting to win, it's because they won some 10-9 games or they won some 15-13 games. I don't see them winning 35-3 like every Jet fan thinks they're going to do. We got the comparisons when the Giants beat Carolina and then the Jets beat Carolina in the preseason. How the Jets beat them by more points, and I'm like, again, we don't know what's going to happen. Clue how long it'll work out. I think that defense is very good. I don't think they're the top defense in the league by any stretch of the imagination, but I think they're one of the best quarterback rushing teams in the league. And if they do manage to get guys in 3rd and 15, 3rd and 17 because of penalties or tackle behind the line of scrimmage, that's where their bread and butter is, and that's where they're going to make their head.
Okay, so best case scenario, worst case scenario for the Jets. I think best case for this team, I hate to say it because of the is a division title. They're not in the Kansas City realm. They're not in the Cincinnati realm. I don't know what to expect from Buffalo because of the defensive injuries. And I don't know what to expect from Miami because Tua Tagovailoa might have a concussion right this very second. We don't know. But that's the high expectation. Get a home playoff game, get a 3 or 4 seed, and at least prove that this first year was worth it and make this worth it for Aaron Rodgers to come back as a 40-year-old quarterback next year. Now, the worst case scenario is twofold. Middle worst case is to do exactly what Brett Favre did in year 1 and go 9-7. In this case, would be 9-8 and miss the playoffs, and watch other quarterbacks do better than you, and maybe Mike White leading the Miami Dolphins to a division title. That is a possible worst case scenario. But the real worst case is this team does exactly what they did last year, go 7-10, and Aaron Rodgers decides, maybe it's time to take my talents to a team that can actually win. So honestly, I expected it to be the latter for most of this season, but for some reason, I just think the former of a division title just seems like more of a possibility just because of the fact I think the division is a little weaker.
Yeah, you and I said, there's a possibility they could start off 2-8 or whatever it was when we started looking at
The rest of their schedule, though, is a lot better than I thought it was. So if they start the season 3-3, which I think is a middle of the road scenario and might be a best case scenario because it's a tough schedule that includes Kansas City, Buffalo, and Dallas right out of the gate, then I think that this team can definitely go on a run.
Right. Yeah, I think the key to this whole thing is, and this is why I don't like these talks and these prediction stuff, is because to get there is one thing. Again, I think once you see them against Jacksonville, San Diego, Kansas City, Cincinnati, and Buffalo, or whoever it is comes out of the East, I don't think they sniff winning a playoff game because of those. Because I don't think they run the table in the AFC and get to the Super Bowl automatically.
No, I don't think there's any way this team gets to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, I think that those top teams, that's why everybody said when Aaron Rodgers decided to go there, are you sure you want to go to the AFC? There's a lot of young guys out there that are really good and a lot of young teams. Whereas, like I said, if Philadelphia falls off, who do you have in the NFC? There's a lot of question marks in the NFC with the Rams being down, with Seattle not being that good, with, Minnesota's beatable, obviously, Chicago, you got Atlanta. I mean, nobody scares you in the NFC other than the Eagles at this point. And again, we'll see what happens to them. That's going to be another proving ground.
Another team that they played. Yeah, another team that they played this year. They played them in like week 6. Okay. Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting season, although they have to bite back on the fact that the Chargers are considered one of the best. They always will find a way to shoot themselves in the foot. But we know. But we know
me,
that.
As long as that head coach is there, they will never win anything. But that's my feeling.
If they didn't fire him last year, I don't know how that happens this year.
I like the Chargers as long as they don't go up 21-0. Then I don't like their chances of winning a football game after that. I was going to pick the Chargers for the next segment, but I didn't. So that's your Chargers segment. All right. Usually, guys, half of the teams that make the playoffs one year miss them the next to be replaced by 7 new victims of another team. So, what teams will go from not in the playoffs at all to the playoff? Remember, 2 seasons ago, the Bengals did this and actually went to the Super Bowl. And what teams will do the opposite? Remember, last year the Rams missed the playoffs. Fuck them picks badly after winning the Lombardi the year before. All right, so we're going to start with the NFC. Anthony, in the NFC, who will follow the path of the 2022 Vikings, Giants, and Seahawks and find themselves from off of the playoff guest list to the VIP suite this year? Well, a lot of hype is going behind the Detroit Lions. That's the team I'm going to talk about. The team that's actually opening this season in 24 hours in Kansas City against the defending champion Chiefs. This is a team that started out 1-6 and rallied to win 8 of the last 10 games. Was in the playoff picture until the final Sunday night game. Unfortunately, they were eliminated prior to kickoff of that game. And by the way, they took the Green Bay Packers with them into the offseason, and a big reason why Aaron Rodgers is now here in New York instead of still in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Year 3 of Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell, who was, I'm not going to lie, he's won me over just for his personality alone and his ability to skill the shit out of his own players, let alone the opposing team. But also, this is a team that hasn't won a division title since 1993 when Scott Mitchell was quarterbacking the team. So we're going a long way back. You have to start with Jared Goff, obviously. A guy coming off his best campaign since 2018 when he led the Rams to the Super Bowl, 4,400 yards passing, 29 touchdowns. He overcame a struggling start early in the year with the turnovers, with fumbles and interceptions. Finished off strong and only took to do one interception over the final 7 games of last season, 17 touchdowns to go with that. By the way, he did go into MetLife Stadium and beat a giant team that was hot at that time. So I gotta give him that consideration. But the defensive side of football, I do want to pay attention to. I think the numbers itself, and Joe, you mentioned how stats and numbers don't tell the whole story. The Lions is a perfect example of that because they were so bad through the first 8 games that when they actually played better, it was a turn of 2 different seasons. They finished in the bottom half of the league defensively, but they was really good to end the year. Aiden Hutchinson and James Houston, that combination combined for 17.5 sacks and finished 1 and 2 respectively among rookies in that category. Hutchinson actually had the second most snaps, played the second most snaps in the NFL last season. The Raiders' Max Crosby is ahead of him in that category. Then you add Josh Pascal on top of that, and you have a very good pass rush. But the secondary is where all the money went in the offseason. They signed Cameron Sutton from the Pittsburgh Steelers. I almost said Penguins. I'm thinking about hockey. Believe it or not. And in September, so training camp starts still too soon enough. But then they also signed Emmanuel Mosley from the 49ers on a discount. He's coming off an ACL injury. So that moves C.J. Gardner-Johnson over to the nickel position. And I'm interested to see how defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, another Jet alumni, how he's going to mold that secondary that gave up a lot of big plays for much of last season, and how when you saw, particularly that Sunday night game, how they really frustrated Aaron Rodgers in that Packer offense, and particularly in one-on-one situations. Aaron Rodgers just didn't have anybody to throw the ball to most of that Sunday night game. So it's going to be very interesting to see whether or not Jared Goff can play more continue to play at the 2018 version and not the 2019 version that frustrated Sean McVay so much that he was traded in the offseason the following campaign. And can the defense continue that momentum? And they're going to have a good test with Patrick Mahomes, but if Travis Kelce is not playing tomorrow night, then that definitely gives the Lions and that pass rush a better advantage, considering they don't have to worry about Kelce being one-on-one over the middle. So I think, and they're in a winnable division now. The boogeyman is gone from Green Bay. Justin Fields in Chicago still kind of building. And Minnesota's a team that won so many close games that the step back is almost inevitable. Not to mention you got Kirk Cousins, a quarterback. Come on. Let's be honest. It's Kirk Cousins for crying out loud. So the division is wide open. Probably the first time in a long time. I would say maybe since Brett Favre left to go to the Jets in 2009 that we see the NFC North division really being this wide open with no clear-cut favorites of being of knowing who's going to win that division title. So for the Lions, the opportunity is right there. But again, can they avoid that inevitable step back and move forward with the way how they were able to finish last season? Are we going to see the team that finished 8-2 down the stretch, or do we regress back to the 1-16 that has been the same old Detroit Lions that we've known for so long?
Just remember, by the way, first of all, it was Rodney Peete who was the main starter for the Lions in 1993. Eric Kramer started the playoff game. Thank you, Pro Football Reference. But one thing I do want to mention about the Lions, and one reason why I don't buy them, is everyone's talking about that Packer game that happened week 18. 2 weeks prior, I saw them getting gashed by the team that ended up with the number 1 pick in the draft, the Carolina Panthers, who weren't with Christian McCaffrey anymore in the backfield, and they could not play at all with them. So that's a team that I think likes to play from ahead a lot more than play from behind. And Detroit's not going to be able to play from ahead all the time. Dan Campbell is a very good motivator. Let's just say that, and let's see if the talent can match the hype. The Jets and Lions have talent. Have hype? What the hell is going on here? All right, Joe. The Packers, the Rams, and the Cardinals were in 2023 not able to match their playoff success in 2022, especially the Rams and the Cardinals. Jesus. So, who's poised to possibly follow in their footsteps in 2023?
I think I got the assignment wrong, but
you did, but that's fine. I kind of have something to add to that.
Because again, I look at the 49ers taking a step back, but in that division, who are they taking a step back to? Right?
That's a problem. That's the biggest problem.
Seattle might be okay. We're not sure yet, what they're going to look like. They'll probably be good, but I think my point was
again by default.
Yeah, I think my point was that they're not going to go anywhere after that, and I think it's because they've done so well in the past 3 years that how much that takes out of them. And again, until this morning, they were in camp. So, and again, now that he comes back, we all remember you don't just step on the field and become an all-pro again. It's going to take him a few weeks to get his timing back, to get a couple of different things down, to get the defenses back. So, and then this whole idea that I know we're going to talk about later of, I'm glad John Lynch made a decision at quarterback, because as we said, when you have 2 or 3 quarterbacks, it means you really don't have one. But I'm not sure they picked the right guy, and I'm not sure he's even going to be healthy at this point for the first 3 or 4 games. So counting on Sam Darnold doesn't really mean much to me. Again, he may do okay because of all the weapons that they have, and they have a decent offensive line. And again, he's got a much better coach than he's ever had.
Much better defense on the other side.
Yeah. Again, he's got a lot of things going for him in that team. But that team's had a lot of things going for them in the last 3 years, and they've come up short. And so I'm not sure they even get as far as they've gotten. I don't think they're in the NFC Championship game. I'm not sure they win a wild card game. I just think they've had so much taken away from them in their heart and soul. They tell you how hard it is to get back up. I read an article today. A couple of guys said, once we lose, we don't watch the Super Bowl. We don't watch the rest of the playoffs. It takes me 3 months to even want to get out of bed. And now that's all they want is to win a championship game. And sometimes you put all that pressure on yourself with a young quarterback or whatever. That could be a tough thing for. I'm not sure I take the fact that you can throw anybody in a quarterback with Kyle Shanahan and you're automatically going to be where you were. I think that's a little bit of a false hope at that point. And I'm guessing Trey Lance must have been really bad in training camp, because to just get rid of him seems odd, and to keep Sam Darnold. I think you'd at least keep the younger guy on the team at some point, because they didn't get much for him. It's not like they went out and got 3 guys for him or 3 picks or whatever the story is.
You mean what they gave up in order to move up to draft him in the first place?
Oh, yeah, we'll talk about that. We have time to talk about that. Since
yes, that's what I'm saying. I don't want to get into it now, but again, that's the investment you put into him. To completely cut ties seems a little bit strange at this point, and since Purdy's not healthy. And that's going to play on them in the beginning of the year. And I think they start to put pressure on themselves. They may start to get a little bit, pointing fingers at stuff. And I'm not sure how high that defense can stay. So I think they'll take a step back, but not necessarily that they don't contend for the division, because they don't have a division to play in. They only have
low-key team that could have a bad year, by the way. I actually do think Seattle is going to win that division. I think they have enough of a building block that I do think San Francisco's had a lot of luck the last few years. And if Darnold is starting any more than 8 games this season, this team is not going anywhere, because you know what? A good defense can only take you so far in this NFL now. And eventually the talent is going to catch up to you. So I actually do think it's not as bad of a pick as you say. You did also misunderstand the assignment, Joe, but that's okay. All right. All right. Now, before you call Jay a homer for this pick, I was going to pick this beforehand. So Jay, four AFC teams went from out to in last season. So who joins the reins of the 2022 Jaguars, Chargers, Dolphins, and Ravens?
Yeah, I always hate it when my analyst side goes head to head with my fan side, especially with the non-local teams. And it's been a minute since the Steelers were a playoff team. They lost in the wild card round in 2021 after sneaking in the back door at 9-7-1 in Big Ben's final season. And a couple of minutes since their last division title. They went 12-4 in 2020 to win the AFC North, but lost in the wild card round. And you have to go all the way back to 2017 for the last time they made it out of the wild card round. They were up and down last year, started 2-6, finishing 7-2 with rookie quarterback Kenny Pickett, who had 0 first-team reps during camp and was thrown into the deep end in the second half of Week 4 against the Jets through 3 picks. They lost, as star edge rusher and game record T.J. Watt for weeks 2 through 8. Yet somehow they kept head coach Mike Tomlin's streak of not having a losing season going, winning their last 4 and narrowly missing the playoffs. And that finish has the 2023 hype train going something pretty fierce, pretty much since draft night, where the Steelers added cornerback Joey Porter Jr., yes, he's son of, and offensive tackle Broderick Jones from national champion Georgia Bulldogs, along with edge rusher Nick Herbig, and continued into the offseason when they added veterans like defensive back Patrick Peterson, guard Isaac Samalo, wide receiver Allen Robinson, and outside linebacker Marcus Golden to fill holes at positions of need, and then remade their entire linebacking core by adding Cole Holcomb, Landon Roberts, and Quan Alexander. All that's been important, as well as the continued health and top-flight performance of stars like Watt. His pass rushing mate Alex Highsmith, free safety Minkah Fitzpatrick, running back Najee Harris, and wide receivers Deontay Johnson, George Pickens. But so much of their success or failure this season will hinge on the continued development, the year 2 leap, to use the NFL term of art, of their quarterback. Now, Pickett improved as 2022 wore on, 4 touchdowns against just 1 pick over his final 4, along with leading the Steelers on 4 game-winning drives of those 7 second-half wins. And the Steelers need to see that improvement continue into this season. Ranked 8th among quarterbacks with an expected points added per dropback rate of 0.1 in the final 5 weeks, well above his overall season rate of negative 0.02. Showing the improvement he made as the season wore on. His EPA rate stands out in contrast to his 81.4 passer rating, 24th, and his 56.3 completion percentage, 26th, during the last 5 weeks of the season, showing he was at his best in key moments, highlighted by those game-winning drives. Now, Pickett came into OTAs and training camp as the undisputed QB1. So unlike last year, he's taken all the first team reps since day 1 of year 2. That, coupled with his offseason work, both with his wide receivers, developing that chemistry with them, as well as on his own, has resulted in the type of improvement that has folks thinking the Steelers can be a playoff team this season. Starts not only with his command, but his ownership of the Steelers offense. And when Pickett was dropped into the deep end at halftime of that Week 4 game, he felt like he was, quote, just worried about executing the plays. But as the season wore on and he came to understand the alerts and the checks at the line of scrimmage, got more comfortable looking at the playbook and saying, I want to use this and I don't want to use that. He's improved his awareness in the pocket, which is a key skill for making that year 2 leap. Made some subtle adjustments. He's better at recognizing where the pressure is coming from and moving within the pocket to avoid it, all while keeping his eyes downfield and maintaining that throw-first mentality, as opposed to taking off too soon and either making a throw on the move or scrambling for yards, a habit that he brought over from college, albeit because he was so good on the move. The result of this change in habit is that he wasn't sacked once in the preseason and didn't rush for a single yard. All of these adjustments, changes, and improvements have resulted in offensive coordinator Matt Canada allowing the playbook to get opened and giving Pickett the chance to add the deep shot to the scheme, a chapter that was practically closed last season as Pickett averaged just 6.2 yards per attempt, second lowest in the NFL. His 28 passes of 20 yards plus were 25th. In the final preseason game alone, Pickett connected on 2 passes of 30-plus yard, one to Johnson, did a nice job of fitting the ball into his receiver before the safety that was patrolling the middle of the field could get over to help, and one to Pickens, where he showed confidence in his receiver to win a 50-50 situation. Overall in that game, Pickett spread the ball around, starting from drive 1. First 4 passes, 4 different players. Overall in the preseason, Pickett's been ridiculous. 13 of 15. That's 86.7% completion for 199 yards, 13.3 yards per attempt. 2 scores, no picked, for a perfect 158.3 passer rating, leading the Steelers to touchdowns in all 5 of his drives across all 3 games. He also added that's also added to the aforementioned hype about how good the Steelers could be. I got to give credit to Pickett for putting all of this in the correct context. A sign of his ever-increasing leadership, saying that it might be wise to pump the brakes a little on that hype train until they actually get into games where the score actually matters. After all, Pittsburgh was undefeated in the preseason last year, then had that 2-6 start. Here's that quote. I think it's proof that all the work that we put in paid off, and we had a good preseason, but obviously now it counts. Now, the fan in me wants to go all in on the hype and believe, but the analyst in me is more inclined to follow along with the Athletic's Mark Caboli, who's been covering the Steelers beat for over 20 years, who in his piece on Monday wrote the following. They are good. They can be really good, and they are headed in the right direction. And yet a better roster and easier schedule doesn't necessarily translate into more wins. Before I can be all on board this year, I need to see two things: how they deal with astronomical expectations and how they deal with failure. We haven't seen them face either yet, with one being more critical than the other. The biggest concern I have is how they'll deal with failure. Believe it or not, Pickett isn't going to have a perfect passer rating all season as he did through 3 preseason games. He's not going to lead the offense to 5 TDs and 5 drives. He's going to be sacked. He's going to turn the ball over. And he's going to have a poor running game at times. He's going to have questionable play calls from Matt Canada. He's going to deal with bad game plans, and he's going to have 3 and outs. The offense hasn't had an opportunity to respond to failure yet. The ability to work through adversity and fight through games where things aren't going well will always determine which teams are good and which teams aren't. You can point to late last year, but that was a different team, and most of those mistakes weren't created by Pickett. Who knows? Maybe this offense will excel in that regard, but we just don't know yet. No, we just don't know yet. I'm going to be cautiously optimistic, which is why they're my AFC team, likely to take a step up and make the playoffs this season where they didn't last season.
Of course, they've already know what failure is. They had Mitch Trubisky as quarterback for 4 games last year. That's like really having failure. It's funny when you look at the season entirely for Pittsburgh last year, you're like, okay, they made their way back to a 9-8 record. But then when you also look, it's like, if Kenny just didn't throw that pick in the Miami game on Sunday Night Football, they'd be 10-7 and in the playoffs.
Right.
Then
That's the thing.
But also, I think that game against Baltimore on New Year's Day of last year is definitely a game that almost represented like the second game for Kenny, which is kind of funny.
And games like that, have people, they have people believing that even if, he's never going to put up Ben Roethlisberger type 5,000-yard season, that he can still be the next franchise quarterback in Steelers history. And that's a lot to put on a kid in his second year in the league.
Well, at least it'll help the ladder go through when they don't have to go through 7,000 different quarterbacks like other teams do. Ironically enough, the Cleveland Browns are still in.
And ironically enough, who'd have thought that they'd have the same 3 quarterbacks in the room as they did last year? Go figure.
A rarity. It's funny to say that Mason Rudolph is still. I didn't realize. Okay, so the Baltimore Ravens are my pick to fall out of the playoffs. They were barely a playoff team last year, by the way. They were only 10-7, and once again, Lamar Jackson missed the end of the year due to injury. This is 2 years in a row. The year before, it cost them the playoffs. Last year, they snuck in at 10-7, and were pretty close to actually winning a playoff game in Cincinnati, but Tyler Huntley lost the football before breaking the plane, and Cincinnati returned it for a score, and that's how that cost them the victory. Now, this is more of a gut feeling for a few reasons. Yes, Baltimore secured Lamar Jackson long term, and that's a little bit of an issue sometimes when you now have a little bit of stability. Now you fear that when is the other shoe going to fall, or in the case of Lamar, when is the other leg going to break? They also have wide receivers. They also brought in Odell Beckham Jr. They started to kind of give themselves some more weapons. Hopefully, then they have a full season of J.K. Dobbins at running back. This team does have good players, but Baltimore has always had a ceiling, and I don't think right now that ceiling is better than Cincinnati's ceiling. So you already are hitting a little bit of a wall. And even then, the division that they're in, with Cincinnati twice a year, with Pittsburgh twice a year, who they really couldn't beat at their worst last year in that Week 17 game. Not to be fair, Pittsburgh was still a young team last year. And even Cleveland, Where in the best case scenario, that could be a 10 or 11 win team just if Deshaun Watson shows anything like his 2019, 2020 self, where he was throwing the ball over for Houston. It's not an easy division, and this is a team that has shown kind of the same 9-8, 10-7 pattern over the last few years. And
yeah, I agree with you on that, Rabbi. They could very well be back to the level of beating each other up that had Chris Berman referring to them as the AFC Norris.
It could be a division where everybody is over 500. And if that's the case, you might only see one or two playoff teams out of that division. And if you put a gun to my head, the first two teams I would think of is Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, because I think they're the two most complete teams. Baltimore is a little older in a bunch of spots, and they're just not as consistent offensively. Maybe this team will get over the hump in the near future. I don't see it happening now, and I do see them taking a little bit of a step back. Honorable mention, by the way, to the Chargers. I was going to pick the Los Angeles Chargers also for this spot. But again, I think they're too talented, and they have Denver and Las Vegas in their division rather than Pittsburgh and Cleveland. So,
I agree with you on this pick completely, Rabbi. The thing that intrigues me most about Baltimore is Todd Monken replacing Greg Norman.
Yeah, it's going to be a very interesting difference because Monken does not have the NFL experience that you would see.
He doesn't. But the question is I think we're going to see once and for all whether or not the knock warranted or whether the knock on Lamar Jackson as a passer is warranted, or if he actually shows people that he can play in a pass first type, and pass first and pass more often and pass more complicated type of scheme, or if before we even hit the quarter pole, it's back to Lamar Jackson doing the same type of things he did under Greg Roman, because that's where he's more comfortable. So to me, that's the interesting chemistry experiment to watch.
To be fair, though, and I hate to say it, with I know Lamar has had an injury history, but I think with talents like Lamar Jackson or even to Michael Vick back in the day, or even a Cam Newton back in the day, I don't think you can ever run a pass first offense. But yes, when you said pass complicated or pass more often offense, that is something to be more interested about.
Right, exactly. It's a question of how does Monken marry his scheme, which, you and I watched what Stetson Bennett did with that scheme the last 2 years at Georgia, whether or not, how much does he have to adapt it because of the skill set or despite the skill set that Lamar brings, which is different and it's not traditional. Does Lamar kind of like jump at the chance to finally be that type of passer? Or does Monken realize, okay, he's never going to be that type of passer, and I have to dial things back more towards what Roman was doing? That's going to be the interesting thing to watch.
All right, guys. So the Super Bowl
Joe's favorite part of the show.
The Super Bowl is in Las Vegas this year, and it's time for at least three of us. We can promise you we'll be making our picks as we gamble our dignity away and make the picks that we just never, ever, ever want to see again.
What were last year's picks? Who won? Did anybody come close last year?
I had Cincinnati and Green Bay last year, so I at least was very close on one side.
God, Joe, I make a habit of never actually going back and looking what I did, the picks I made last year. Once we get past, we go back and look at them on the Super Bowl show to see how bad everybody was.
These two picked Buffalo. I remember that very
I
completely.
did pick Buffalo. I don't remember who I picked out of the NFC. Actually, now I want to go take a look and see.
Well, let's not do that. Joe, want to start off?
Sure, why not? I think anybody in the AFC versus I think the Eagles get through again. Excuse me. I think the Eagles get through again in the NFC because I do think they're the class of the operation. And I think Cincinnati will finally get over the hump and beat Kansas City.
I like how you say finally get over the hump, even though they made the Super Bowl just 2 years ago. Buffalo fans are just weeping right now. It's like,
Wait a
oh,
minute.
that's
They
the
are.
hump that they get to go over? All right.
Yeah.
Anthony, you want to go next?
Well, speaking of Buffalo, how good is it to see Damar Hamlin back on the field?
Yes, absolutely.
He did make the 53-man roster, so all power to him and wish him all the best this season. But that said, on the NFC side, I got 49ers and Eagles in the NFC Championship game rematch. This time at Levi Stadium, I think the 49ers get a little payback and break through. The AFC side, I got Cincinnati beating Kansas City, but this time the game's going to be in Cincinnati. This time around, so I have 49ers and Bengals as my Super Bowl teams. Trust me, I'll be wrong in January as always. But hey, look, Chris Berman picked the 49ers and Bills, 14, 15 years in a row? I can't be that bad. So I'm going to stick with the 49ers and the Bengals for my Super Bowl picks.
Hey, I haven't been spot on since the year Nisa and I both picked Pittsburgh and Seattle to go to the Super Bowl. We're still kicking ourselves all these years later for not putting any money down on it. I agree with Joe on the NFC. I think it's the Eagles, and granted, A, it may be taking the easy way out, and two, it might be sacrilegious for a Giant fan to say it. But despite, losing a couple of players and even both coordinators, to me, there's something brewing in the city of brotherly love, and it starts with quarterback Jalen Hurts. In all of his interviews coming into this season, I got the sense that he's on a mission, and the rest of the team is similarly focused. I know that it's rare for Super Bowl losers to make it back to the playoffs, let alone get another crack at the Lombardi. But there's just, to me, there's something there. And granted, I don't think they're going to put up 70 odd sacks on defense, and they may take a half a step back in that division. I just have this feeling that come January, they'll still be the team the rest of the NFC has to get past in order to get to Las Vegas. As far as the Chiefs, I'm completing the repeat. I have the Chiefs coming out of the AFC. They have the best player on the planet in Patrick Mahomes, and he showed last year that he can work his magic no matter who his passing game options are. Yes, they need all-world tight end Travis Kelce to stay healthy. He's a game-time decision for tomorrow night. And yes, they need to sort out defensive lineman Frank Clark contract situation sooner rather than later to get his pocket wrecking skills back.
That's Chris Jones, by the way, not Frank Clark.
Jones, sorry, my bad. Yeah, I always confuse the two of those. Thank you.
I know.
But as long as Andy Reid is on the sidelines and Mahomes is under center, to me, the AFC's road to the Super Bowl will continue to go through Arrowhead.
I agree with Jay, actually.
We're both going to be wrong come January.
We probably are, but Kansas City has made the Super Bowl 3 out of the last 4 years. And as much as Cincinnati was really the darling last year, it kind of got a little bit too cocky. I kind of worry a little bit about Joe Burrow's durability after what happened in the preseason. So, and yes, Travis Kelce got injured, and he might be out for tomorrow's game, and he ain't going to be out the rest of the season. I like Kansas City in the AFC. Way too many weapons, and Patrick Mahomes is a special quarterback that we're going to see from year to year. The NFC took a dart, threw it at the dartboard. Here's why it's not going to be Philadelphia. Nobody repeats the NFC East. Very rarely does Philadelphia actually have that consistent of a team year to year. Jalen Hurts is not going to have that year again. And when you lose both of your coordinators, something has to happen. So I'm not picking Philadelphia. I'm not picking San Francisco. I'm going to pick the team that finished third in the NFC last year. They have a lot of weapons, and you know what? A lot of people are discrediting them. But in a bad NFC, Minnesota could actually do the trick. And yes, I understand that that their offensive coordinator is now changed. No more 4-yard outs on a 4th and 10 in a playoff game. That's not going to happen. No more Dalvin Cook, but I think the Minnesota Vikings know what they're doing. They kind of do and crank out a by committee back there, and I think Kevin O'Connell might be the next Sean McVay. Now, once he loses his talent, then you really will be the next Sean McVay, and will wish you would have gone to Amazon Prime in a commentator contract. But I'm going to go out on the limb. So I'm going to go Kansas City and Minnesota, a Super Bowl 4 rematch for my Super Bowl pick.
All right. I will tell my niece on Sunday when I see her that you picked her Vikings to come out of the NFC.
Almost forgot about that. I know.
And look,
Yeah.
I gotta have the indignity of explaining to my brother, the diehard 49er fan, that I picked his team to get to the Super Bowl over my own team. And by the way,
Yeah.
they play week 4, so I'm not talking. Cassius, if you're watching this, I am not talking to you that week.
Play
So
week
do
3.
not call
They
me
play week.
or text me whatsoever.
They play week 3 actually, and they play
Week
on
3.
Thursday Night Football. So that's
All
not going
right.
to be
So
a fun.
okay. Okay. So if you're watching this, Cassius, more of a reason for me to ignore you that week.
15 days from now. All right. Finally, as we go up to the podium with the last pick of the with the last segment pick of the 2023 NFL preview, I select Trey Lance, quarterback, Dallas Cowboys. Wait, what? Yeah, I said it correctly. San Francisco's number 3 pick from 2021, and remember they traded up twice from 12th to do so. It was only worth a 4th round pick to give Dallas insurance at the most important spot in the NFL. To hear what we're going to talk about in this segment, let me just give you some of the players that were picked between 3 and 12 in 2021. Jamar Chase, Jalen Waddle, Patrick Surtain II, Devontae Smith, Justin Fields, and the person who would have been at their original spot of number 12, Micah Parsons. So, Joe, is the Trey Lance era a disaster for the Niners or a nuclear disaster for the Niners?
Wow.
Yeah. Again, the worst case scenario of this is he takes over for Dak and they actually win something. That's the disaster because he comes over, takes over Dak. He beats the 49ers in the playoffs and brings them into the promised land. And so that's the downside for the Niners. I don't see the upside for it because you got a 4th round pick that's could turn out to be something, but they can't be counting on that. And you got two very inexperienced guys with the keys to a really good offensive system and a really good set of offensive players. But again, it's like giving your 12-year-old the keys to the Ferrari and saying, let's see how. Sam Darnold's not the answer. A hurt Brock Purdy's not the answer. And to not have anybody back there that's coming along, like, what are you going to do in 3 and 4 years or 5 years at this point? I can't imagine that this guy was so bad either in the locker room or on the field that they didn't want him around the team anymore. So maybe there's something there that you won't get the worst case scenario. But the guy that's going to lose in all this could be Dak Prescott because we all know how Jerry Jones is. And why you would create your own controversy of bringing somebody in when you didn't have a controversy to begin with is kind of crazy. So I think
but isn't that kind of crazy right up Jerry Jones's alley, Joe? I mean, come on.
Yeah, but again, it's downside and bad downside.
To be fair, as much as we give the Sorry, I was freezing. To be fair, though, as much as we've given Jerry Jones shit over the previous years, the drafting, ever since he's kind of gotten simple and to the point and don't get flashy toy happy, he's been pretty much nailing every draft over the last few years. Dak Prescott wasn't the reason why this team was 12-5 last year. The offensive and defensive lines were the reason why this team was 12-5 last year, and the running back. So I'll get to my opinion on this a little bit. But Jay, Trey Lance, also, I don't know if you have the stat of him becoming one of the first top 5 draft picks to play the least amount of snaps ever for the team he was drafted, but this is kind of wild considering this was 2 years ago that he was drafted.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all remember the shock and surprise on draft night in 2021 when the pick was in for the 49ers and it was Trey Lance's name that Commissioner Goodell called and not Mac Jones. Every media outlet had Jones going to the 49ers at number 3 as he seemed to be an almost perfect fit for a Shanahan offensive scheme coming out of Alabama with the skill set that he showed. Lance, on the other hand, didn't seem to fit that scheme at all, at least not in my eyes, though mine weren't the only eyes with that opinion. Now, here we are on the eve of the 2023 season, and Trey Lance has gone from being the future QB1 for a team a lot of folk have repping the NFC in the Super Bowl to being no better than QB2 for a team hoping to make the playoffs as a wild card. To say that all those platitudes and compliments that GM John Lynch and head coach Kyle Shanahan rolled out in reference to Lance in the wake of that pick didn't age well is like saying the Grand Canyon's a little hole in the ground. Did Lance run into some bad luck with injury? Sure. In his first NFL start in Arizona in week 5, Lance ran the ball 16 times, 9 of them inside runs, and he emerged with a knee injury. The following season, he broke his ankle in the first quarter in week 2 when he encountered a Seattle Seahawks linebacker on a designed run up the middle. That run had been a bread and butter play for Lance at North Dakota State, one in which he'd routinely either ran past or ran over would-be tacklers in the Missouri Valley Football Conference. He looked entirely different running that play against NFL defenders. Lance didn't show much getaway speed out on outside runs, so Shanahan turned to inside runs, which exposed Lance to bigger bodies and bigger hits. That injury wiped out the rest of that season. And in conjunction with a 2021 broken finger that muddled his rookie season, it meant Lance started his third year in essentially the same spot he was in after he was drafted, having had few in-game repetitions and badly in need of playing time. But the knock on the 49ers giving up so much draft capital to move from 12 to 3 to get Lance was that due to the lack of actual games played, thus a severe lack of film to review, there were just too many unknowns to even have taken him at 12. He never ran a 40-yard dash, something that would seem critical if he was going to be used in design quarterback run plays and packages. And few 49er officials ever saw Lance play a college game. Lance only has 19 collegiate starts and 4 NFL starts on his resume. That's 23 starts in 5 seasons between college and the NFL. Even Brock Purdy, who I am higher on than Joe is, but Joe and I don't always agree. Purdy, who's an outlier, Purdy, who's an outlier of a quarterback if there ever was one, was on the verge of potentially leading the 49ers to a Super Bowl at age 23. Even he has more starts as a rookie, 5 and 48 starts at Iowa State. I read a piece by former NFL GM Randy Mueller, who now writes for The Athletic, and he nailed it when he said, and here's the quote, "It was all the other skill sets for me. I never saw an NFL passer. I never saw the accuracy. I never saw the poise in the pocket, just because that's not what they do there," meaning Lance at North Dakota State. None of it would ever have equaled to even thinking about picking a guy that high. And trading up to do it was somewhat reckless, in my opinion. Now, Mueller acknowledged that the 49ers weren't alone in thinking Lance was a top 5 prospect, but it's not a move he would have made. And here's his quote on that. "I think it's just a lesson in inexperience more than anything. I think those guys," he means Lynch and Shanahan, "are probably good evaluators. We don't know that yet. An experienced GM or team builder, I just don't think would have had that same nonchalance to say, hey, we're going to gamble at that level." Now, I agree 100% with that assessment as much today as I did on draft night. Look, Trey Lance is a great guy. Everybody in that locker room says he's a great guy, went about his business the right way, never complained. But the thing is, at the end of the day, the 49ers aren't the right team for Lance. They aren't now. They weren't on draft night in 2021. I've never been able to see what Shanahan and Lynch saw when they thought he could be right for this team. This is a team with elite players like Nick Bosa, who just signed his record $170 million extension today, George Kittle, Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel as its core, and it added more tier 1 players like Christian McCaffrey and Javon Hargrave in the midst of a championship contending window, having lost a Super Bowl and 2 NFC title games in the past 4 seasons. You can't maximize that window and develop a project, especially not when that project is a quarterback. Purdy, like him or not, is a right now quarterback. Lance is not, and this team has to have a right now quarterback. The fact that the 49ers had to learn this the hard way and that Lance is the collateral damage of that lesson is rough for all involved, but some lessons can only truly be learned that way.
Anthony?
Yeah, I would say this, though. And it could be just a shoot of bad luck. I mean, injuries, he hasn't played. He's a young player who still has to develop on a roster that's weak now. I mean, look at that defense. I mean, that team and the running and the weapons they have on offense, the 49ers are built to win now. And you can't walk to a locker room and explain to the veterans of the team why you're going to sacrifice an opportunity to win a Super Bowl because you want to put all the chips in on a quarterback that just hasn't seen the field all that much in the last few years. So that's part of it too. And I just feel like his confidence is completely shot. I mean, let's just be 100% honest,
right?
I mean, you think about when you go through college and you're so good, and then you're going to the next level, and everything you that went over so well in college as far as your own personal skill set, doesn't work at all. And then we've seen the issues with the accuracy and the fact that even the read option plays that he was so known for in college, he doesn't have the speed because everyone's fast in the NFL. So maybe the best case scenario, at least in the long run, is Trey Lance being a backup and being able to at least study and spend more time in the film room and being an understudy. But the thing is, and like Joe said, the biggest loser of all this may be Dak Prescott because they've been Jerry Jones to put his own quarterback in a situation where he's in on thin ice scenario going into the opening game of the season because he decides not to even consult anybody in his own organization before making a trade. So and by the way, Cooper Rush is still on that team on the Cowboys also, and he made that offense better than Dak did last season. So there's a lot. So Jerry Jones just made a complete clusterfuck of his own team. And the moment Dak Prescott struggles, you can kind of see things taking a turn for the worse. But going back to Trey Lance. Trey Lance. Yeah, right. Going back to Trey Lance. He really I think he needs time to get his confidence back. He needs to be able to try to get some reps, to try to work on the fundamentals of being the quarterback position. Is Dallas the answer in the long term? Who knows? But I'm trying to look at it from his quarterback, his career, and I think that could be the best thing for him to just learn from behind. Maybe he go to one of the other leagues and just play, and so that he can at least get some reps. Maybe it is one of these spring football leagues that's going on right now. But as far as the 49ers, as far as if you want to say a whiff, this is Carlos Beltran not swinging with 2 strikes in an elite championship still is bad.
Please.
As far as striking out. No, I'm sorry. No, look, I'm sorry. This was a big gamble the 49ers made. Maybe they were trying to get lightning in a ball because think about this a decade ago. They had Alex Smith and got to an NFC title game, and the very next year, a young Colin Kaepernick got them to the Super Bowl with an offense that was completely 180 from what they were running to start that same season. They were I know it's a totally different front office, but same organization. They didn't get lightning in the ball this time around. And now they got a 23-year-old quarterback who just happens to run the offense better than the guy that they initially drafted. And they have the weapons and they in win now mode. So they can't afford to waste a season trying to develop a young quarterback. Like I said, with Trey Lance, a combination of injuries, no reps, and just pure bad luck. And hopefully things can turn around for him. If not in Dallas, maybe somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Anthony, because I don't see how his situation really improved other than going to Dallas removes the whole awkwardness of being the number 3 pick in the draft replaced, by the last pick in the draft at the marquee
change of scenery, though. Change of scenery.
Maybe. I think he'll benefit from that. But in terms of like the pecking order and his ability to get the reps that Anthony's talking about, I don't know that changes because he's still number 3 on the depth chart. He comes in solely because, as Anthony said, Rush ran that offense very well in his time there when Dak was out, and Dak is still Dak. So I don't know that his situation in terms of being able to get those reps has improved any. I guess we'll have a better sense come OTAs and training camp next year. But in the short term, I don't see how his situation improved other than, as you said, Rabbi, the change of scenery and getting out from under the awkward situation that had developed in the quarterback room in San Francisco because of, what happened through circumstance. No fault of anybody's own, but just through circumstance.
I gotta disagree with Anthony, though, by the way. I think, as I just said in the opening beforehand, you need as many quarterbacks as you possibly can who are actually people who can maybe do something. And so you need people in that room because people get injured. As we've seen second string quarterbacks, we've seen third string quarterbacks. In the case of San Francisco, we've seen fourth string quarterbacks play in the games last year.
They ran out of quarterbacks by the time they got to the title game.
But it's kind of telling that at the end of the day, Shanahan saw enough in practices and in preseason action.
I understand that. This is nothing
not only to say that Darnold deserved to be the backup, but that he'd rather have Brandon Allen as the number 3 as opposed to Trey Lance. To me, that part of the that's something that hasn't really been talked about much, but that's essentially what it comes down to. It's less about Darnold, who's whether I know how Joe feels about him. He's a veteran NFL quarterback, and I think he may improve in it with a change of scenery into an offense that may better suit him. And when it came down to decide the third quarterback on that roster, Shanahan said, I'd rather have Brandon Allen as my emergency guy than Trey Lance. That to me almost as interesting.
But I will counter that with this, though. If you have somebody who is supposedly completely healthy like Trey Lance as a third option, that creates as much of a distraction as anything. Now, again, I know that kind of almost circumvents what I'm about to say about the Cowboys. It's like you need people who have had any game experience. And as mentioned, Trey has had 5 games. So that's a little something. Cooper Rush ran that offense pretty good last year. If Dak Prescott has a bad year or a bad start, that's the guy they're going to talk about first, Lance second. And you know what? If you had a year where you threw as many picks as Dak did, guess what? You're going to have a little bit of fire lit under your ass because you got a lot of other grocery shopping in the you got a lot of other grocery items in that bag that are good to go. So, but the one thing I would say is this. I mentioned before, Jamar Chase is an all-pro wide receiver. Jalen Waddle is going to be an all-pro wide receiver. Patrick Surtain is a all-pro corner. Devontae Smith is the number 2 option on probably one of the best offenses in the National Football League. Justin Fields is a highlight reel who still has a lot to improve on, but
finally got himself a legit number 1 receiver to throw to.
Got a number 1 receiver and also can run for 170 yards in a game. And again, Micah Parsons. So all I'm saying is you had all of these guys, all of them who went to big schools, all of them who have seen significant time on the field and not playing 9 games. It's not hard. You don't have to go to the North Dakota States of the world to find your quarterbacks. You don't have to go to the Division FCS, Division 1 AA's to find your quarterbacks. They play in the biggest games every single week. And that's why it's there. Brock Purdy went to a Big 12 school at Iowa State and got himself to a championship game. It's 48 starts. It's no surprise, in my opinion, that he adapted well because he is a pro-style quarterback. As much as people hate Sam Darnold, he's still a guy who's had a lot of experience in the league. He also sees ghosts like nobody's business on the field as well. So, honestly, if you ever make that bad of a decision as a GM, you're lucky you've had all of that stuff in because you should be fired on the spot. This is kind of equivalent to the Detroit Pistons not picking Carmelo Anthony in 2004 when they picked Darko Milicic, because you have all of that talent that could help you continue the pipeline, and you whiffed, and you probably cost yourself a year or 2 of a championship window because of that. Let's see if that happens for this team. I wouldn't be surprised if we come back and we look at this a few years from now. It's like, what if they could have picked the quarterback? Yes, I think Mac Jones might have been a good option for this offense. We'll never know because Mac Jones has still got a lot of work to do, I think, as an NFL quarterback, whether it be the team he was on last year or not. But when we look back at it, this decision was a disastrous one.
Yeah, I mean, Rabbi, to me, I agree with you, Rabbi. To me, it's the latest example of something that you've heard me harp on draft night for years, that no position is more closely tied, in my opinion, to having to be a fit for the system you are going to than the quarterback position, which is why when I saw that pick, I'm like, how does he, there was nothing to me in Trey Lance's film, limited as it was, skill set, or anything else that said, this is a guy who fits that system when you've seen the other quarterbacks who have been part of a Shanahan tree offensive system.
All I'm going to say is the only quarterback last year that did not go to a Big Five school that made the playoffs, and I'll keep flipping him in the back of my head, is Josh Allen going to Wyoming.
Yeah. And the NFL too. I mean, you miss on the quarterback. It really does set your organization back like maybe 4 or 5 years because it takes one thing to develop a quarterback into the guy, but when you don't get it done, I mean, that's a couple of years already down the drain, and before you know it, you're back at square one.
Yeah, there's no bigger positional whiff that has far-reaching consequences as whiffing on drafting a quarterback.
And look, we see with the Cleveland Browns, like how many years now? So that's living proof right there.
We shall see. All right. For Jake Kaplan, Anthony Strait, and Mr. Joe Tufaro, always criticizing announcers on not knowing the rules of reffing, which is perfectly fine, like me, but keep doing the Lord's work. I'm Stephen Rabinowitz. We're live at Facebook.com, on demand at YouTube.com/on the sports lines for both. Word consolidation. Jay, word consolidate the Twitter plug.
At ONTH Sports Lines, where you'll see a link to this show tomorrow in full advance of Thursday night's kickoff. But, check it out on other days of the week. I have a tendency to throw up interesting tidbits of sports that you might find worth a look or a read.
The Yankees stat that he threw up yesterday was a pretty damn good one as well, being 69 and 69. Nice.
First time
since 1969.
You know what?
Now 70 and 69, by the way.
You know what? If Rob Gronkowski saw that stat last night, he would be thrilled.
Oh, yeah. He would have been very, very thrilled. All right, guys.
Thankfully, the rabbi covered the sophomoric part of that one. I
did. I was like, why couldn't it be 70 and 70 for the first time since then?
This is the fun we have on this show, ladies and gentlemen.
Although, again, still a great stat. All right. We'll be back soon. Good night.
Good night,
everyone.